Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Maryland Online webinar about table accessibility do's and don'ts. My name is Richard Smith. I'll be your moderator. So I'll be checking the chat room and things like that so that our presenter does not have to. And I'm going to go ahead and just present our presenter right now. It's Debbie Dorsey. Debbie Dorsey is an associate professor of health at Harford Community College. Debbie is a Maryland Distance Learning Association board member, Quality Matters peer reviewer, and a 2020 NISOD Excellent Award recipient. Now I will pass it off to Debbie.
All right. Hi, everybody. So if you have been at one of my webinars before, you will likely have heard me say this, that I come at accessibility from a faculty perspective because that is my primary role at my institution. And I say that because what you'll see today, I don't get overly technical. I don't go into coding and those sorts of things. I come at this from, if I was talking to faculty and I was training them how to do things, it's exactly how I'm going to present it today to you. So we're talking about table accessibility. And I'm just going to go ahead into it. At one point, we will have some audio because many times people say to me, well, like, what does it sound like on the screen reader, Debbie? And so I've got some of that for you today as well. I always go ahead and turn my camera off as I'm talking because I'm very animated and I think it's a distraction for a lot of people. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So with table accessibility, there are some common problems. And the biggest one is merged cells. And we're going to talk a little bit about that again in just a moment. It's also a big no-no to use tables for layout purposes. And back in the day when we were creating web pages, that was frequently what we used. And I do still see from time to time that people will use tables to try to, create columns, put in images in one cell. We really want to get away from doing that. The other is complex table nesting. And I will share with you a very sort of funny story. Richard and I attended it's a good conference if you are looking for something to attend, but it's the Achieving Higher Ed. Actually, he always retains this information better than I do. What is it called?
It is accessing higher ground.
Yes. And so we did a Adobe Acrobat training, and I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of doing that, but I came in at it completely unaware of terminology. And when they started getting into nesting, I really wanted to flip the table over and leave because it was so frustrating to faculty as a faculty person to try to understand this. But I will give you examples of what nesting looks like. We also this is one that I think that people have a little bit of a challenge sort of wrapping their head around, is that we really don't want to use tables for what I call non-data presentation. So again, I'll give you some examples of that. We see missing header rows and then alt text. So we're going to cover these things as we go through. And we want to talk a little bit about, well, why is this important? So the first thing what we always call to mind when we talk about accessibility is the people who rely on screen readers to understand what is on the page, right? And so right now, what you're looking at is a great example of nesting. You can see that there are merged tables within columns, and there's just a whole lot of stuff going on right now in this table. So that is, again, an example of nesting. And the problem that happens here is that the screen reader will lose track of the reading order. And there are major navigation problems if the table is incorrectly nested. And so I will tell you this, that in general, if it's going to look something like this, it is not going to be properly nested. And that means that as the person goes through their screen reader, it could jump from group 1 to pattern 2 to stress and just move around all over that table. So I am going to talk to you about the benefits and the beauty of using simple tables. So we want to just say no to using tables to describe due dates. And this is something that faculty always do. They want to put their schedule, their module schedules into a table. And this is a problem. We talk about people who need to use screen readers, but we also want to frame this for students who may have some visual spatial cognitive issues going on. And just a reminder, they don't have to let you know that that's what's going on, but you still need to meet the accessibility standards. I bring this up because there still, I think, is a bit of a misconception that this only matters for students who have accommodations, and that is not true. We need to have our information be accessible whether or not there is a student in the course that actually has an issue and needs it, we still have to meet it, right? So there's something called and I'm probably going to say it wrong, dyscalculia, that really is specific to being able to track numerical information. And then about 15 to 20% of our college students have dyslexia. And so looking at both of those two, and there are many others, these are learners who are going to have a hard time understanding relationships in the different cells as well as the structure. Now, this was something that I used to do, and you can see right here that what I've done is I've shown how one module is going to be separated into 2 weeks. And do you notice here that I have one cell split into two? And I would have students, miss deadlines, have issues, and at one point, a student did contact me and say, "I don't understand your tables. I thought chapters 10 and 11 were due November 16th." They had a really difficult time tracking that information. And so what I'm gonna show you, and it's funny that it's somewhat controversial, but I'm gonna suggest to you that this is the way that you should really show your schedule, okay? Because you see how it still works in separating out the week 1 and week 2, but someone who has a cognitive, one of those spatial sort of disabilities, this is so much easier for them to understand. And in general, if a person with cognitive issues can understand it, it's going to work for everyone. And this is something that I've had a hard time getting people to kind of convert over. The hardcore table users still want to do the old way of doing it, but I would encourage you to think about organizing your information as text. It probably is going to be, well, it's not probably, it is going to be better for many people. There's also some people who continue to insist upon using tables to describe grades. And you can see here, this is something that is in fact a hot mess. First of all, there's many merged cells, but do you see how some of them it's off a little bit? Like, this is not in line with this. And there's the font is all smashed together. There's those uneven column divisions. And this is something that I see frequently. I'm a QM reviewer. And so this is something that I see all of the time when I'm reviewing a course is just people continue to insist on using tables to put up this information. So this is an example of conveying non-data information. So when we think about, well, what is data information? This is going to be our STEM faculty, right? There is no way that a math teacher, a math professor cannot use tables when they organize their information. And so this is not to suggest that you should never use tables, but make sure that you're using them for appropriate reasons. And right here, this is not a good use of a table. But besides that, if you, and everyone should be, right? We all know this. When you use a rubric creator in your LMS, it will put it into tables almost always it's going to be accessible. Brightspace, Blackboard, Canvas, when you use their native rubric creator, they're accessible. And you can see here then that it is a cleaner look. So whether or not you even really need to have rubrics outside of your LMS, you could debate that perhaps you don't, and you know that your tables here are going to be pretty clean. Now, if you are a person who still likes to have the rubric listed somewhere else in the LMS besides just here, please be aware that if you try to copy and paste your LMS's rubric, it probably will not carry over to being an accessible table. So use a lot of caution if you try to do that. To me, my best suggestion is just don't do it. Rely on your LMS to show your rubric. Now, merge cells are a big no-no. And so what I've shown you here is the very first table that you see has merged cells. And so what we encourage people to do is to take them and put them into two different simple tables. It conveys the same information, but when I look at it, when I look at the teen 5K and the adult 5K, that just makes so much more sense on my eyeball than does the one at the top where everything is merged. And so what we want to do is talk about two things. We're going to make simple tables, but there's two different simple tables that I'm going to show you. This is the first one, and this is a one header row. So one of the things that's confusing is that term header that we use when we're talking about tables. That's not restricted to rows. A header can also refer to a column. So for example, here, and I'm going to come back to that, we would call this as a table that has two header rows. Okay, so when we get into Word and we're going to take a look at how we can create this, we're going to be using table design. But I wanted to show you if this particular table was set up correctly, if it was accessible, this is what it would sound like.
Participants by age and hometown. Table with 3 rows and 3 columns. Row 1, column 1, name, column 2, age, age selected. Column 3, hometown, hometown selected. Row 2, name, column 1, Jim, age, column 2, 25. Hometown, column 3, Pasadena. Row 3, name, column 1, Mary, age, column 2, 30. 30 selected. Hometown, column 3, Severna Park. Severna Park selected. Door hours by day and time. Table with 3 rows
Now we're
and
going
4
into the
columns.
second one
Row
here.
1, column 1. Monday selected. Column 3, Wednesday. Wednesday selected. Column 4, Friday. Friday.
All right, so I'm going to come back to that one too. But just to make sure everyone was able to see that correct or to hear that. If you were not, let me know. If give me like just a
It should have been good, Deb.
okay, good. All right. Because it's always one of those things where depending on what window you're showing, it could be different. All right, so that's what that initial part, that's what this would sounded like, right? And so the person who is using a screen reader, they can hear what the screen reader is saying and they can visualize based on what they're hearing, what that table would look like and what the information that it's trying to communicate. So again, this is one that has two headers, the row and the column. Again, what we're going to show is that you're going to go into table design and use the header row first column. But again, I want to go ahead and show for you what that will sound like. And so let's bring that back up.
Participants by age and hometown.
But
Table with
a little bit.
Table with 3 rows and 4 columns. Row 1, column 1. Monday. Monday selected. Column 3, Wednesday. Wednesday selected. Column 4, Friday. Friday selected. Row 2, column 1, 9 o'clock m to 11 o'clock m. 9 o'clock m to 11 o'clock m selected. Monday column 2 closed, closed selected, Wednesday column 3 open, Friday column 4 closed, row 3 column 1 11 o'clock at.m to 1 o'clock p.m, Monday column 2 open, Wednesday column 3 closed, Friday column 4 open.
All right, so you can see, or you can hear that again, if it was formatted correctly, it will make sense to the person using the screen reader. So how do we get these things to work the way we want them to? So I'm going to bring in that the same tables that we were just using. So the first thing is we want to make sure that we give our table a heading. Oftentimes people will erroneously put the heading as part of the table as one merged cell across. And again, we don't want to do that. So we're going to use styles and make this heading number 1, right? So you heard in the screen reader sound that it said participants by age and hometown, and then it described the table. So the other thing that we want to do is you can see up here that we're going to go to table design. And if it was not, usually the default is header row, but if it was not selected, we would want to make sure that we do select it up here. And then we also want to go and make sure that usually this is not.
We can't see the table design ribbon.
Hold on for a second. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's
Yeah,
do.
sorry, I didn't catch that.
Let me see here. Let's do a share. And it was doing applications. I'm glad you guys told me. Let's do this one. All right. Are you able to see that now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to rewind back and I am going to clear the formatting for this so that we can go over it again. Okay, so here is the title of the table. And again, I'm going to want to make this a heading. I don't want to put it in as, say, the first row of the table merged across. That is a big issue that a lot of people do. The next thing is you can see that this is a table with one header and it's for the row. And so you want to go up to your table design. Like I said, usually header row is automatically checked, but if it was not, you would want to check it. And then when we go over to table layout, we would want to select repeat header rows. That becomes really important when you have a table that runs down more than one page. And that means that it will repeat that row over and over again so that the person doesn't lose their place. With a table that has 2 headers, the row and the first column, it's the same thing. We would want to use our styles to give it the heading. And then once we're inside the table, we need to go to table design. And now we need to make sure that header row and first column are selected. And again, usually first column is not, you usually have to turn it on. So whereas header row is almost always selected, first column, more often than not, you're going to have to select it. Okay. And then same thing, you want to go and make sure that you've got repeater header rows. So simple tables, right? And do you see now when we talk about how we want to use these for data only? This is data. This is a chart that is explaining, who participated, what their age was, what the hometown was. We are trying to communicate learning material. And so these are appropriate usages of simple tables. All right, so I want to go back. Are you able to see my slides now?
No, you're still on the.
All right, let's do a stop share and we'll do a reshare. All right, how about now?
You're back. You're fine.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go to our next slide. All right, so we did our simple table. Now let's talk about alt text. So If you have multiple different tables, you've got to give, well, you really need to give alt text all the time, but it becomes even more important when you have multiple tables going down a page. If the table is properly formatted, the alt text will say the title, the column headers, and a brief description of the main data trends. So for here, what I would want to put for my alt text is participants by age and hometown, right? That's the title. One header row, name, age, and hometown. That would be the most appropriate alt text to put. For this one, we would want to have store hours by day and time, then one header row, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, one first column header, 9 o'clock a.m. to 11 o'clock a.m. and 11 o'clock a.m. to 1 p.m. Okay, I don't need to go through and give every single thing that's on this table, because if it is properly formatted, it will already be there, right? The person will be able to go through and maneuver through that table. If it's accessible, they will not have any issues. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information all at one time. I can go ahead and answer any questions that you might have.
There's nothing in the chat, but if anyone wants to ask something.
Yeah, I have a quick question. There's always some controversy on that blank. You have that first column header, leaving
Yeah.
that first name blank. Couldn't you just put name there or not?
That is a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up because I meant to say about that. So what you heard when I did that, I use the, what is it called? Here we go, NVDA. That is the screen reader that I use. That particular screen reader will, from time to time, if I'm set up correctly, if I've got a two-header table and it's set up correctly, it'll just not even acknowledge that cell. But on this time through, as I was playing through it, it did acknowledge it. Now, what I would say is, because the very first thing that the screen reader will say is a description of the table itself, if a person does land on that, for, first row one, column one, and that's all they hear, they've probably already visualized that that's probably not going to be anything, right? Because they know that there's going to be a row and a column. I have seen people go in and put into an empty column deliberately blank. And so you could do that. You could, in general, when you make a table and you've got lots of, in the body of the table, if you have something that's blank, then you definitely want to put in there deliberately left blank, because it does, again, it does convey to the person that there is nothing there on purpose, right? Otherwise, if they didn't hear something, they could easily perhaps suspect that there might be something wrong with their assistive technology. It just tells them exactly, it's blank, don't worry about it. So I see that there are other questions as well. Did that answer your question? Was that?
Yeah, it just seems a lot of it's just making sure that you design good tables as, for what you're using. You want to try to use data, but again, with the syllabus, if a well-designed table is done as a syllabus, it could still be usable. It's just a matter of making sure that you use that table correctly. But either way is fine. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so other questions?
There's a couple in the chat rooms. First, are you going to make the slides available? And I believe that's a yes, right?
Yes, they will be available in PDF.
And Wendy's got a really good one, but we'll do a simpler one first. Is there a screen reader you recommend if we want to preview our formatting?
So yes, however, it's got a learning curve. I use NVDA. It is freeware that you can use. It takes a while to get used to it, but it will really give you the experience of what a person uses. There are some other screen readers that try to simulate it a little bit, but they don't work as well. In general, I don't like the ones that are sort of built into the software. So I've seen before, like Microsoft Word will try to get something in there. I don't really like them a lot. For one thing, a person who's using assistive technology, they're not going to use that, right? And so NVDA is the one that I do recommend that you use. But if you are not an individual who uses assistive technology, it will be, you have to spend a little bit of time on it. However, what it will do is give you an appreciation for how a person that uses that assistive technology, what they need. And when people become proficient at using it, they can just jump through one to one to one to one. So what seems a little challenging for us, for the user who's been, kind of using that technology for a long time, it makes perfect sense to them.
And I would recommend the NVDA as well, because I've done that as well, and it is a tough learn. So Wendy had a pretty interesting question. This one's going to be potentially a good one to end on, because it's going to be a tough one. Have you seen anything coming in the AI world that might make screen readers more human and or able to pick up on things like the column and rows, even if merged?
I have not. I think that my general perspective on AI is that you should know how to make something. You should have those skills and not necessarily rely on AI. It's not that it doesn't have its place. For example, there's probably, there's AI that's coming out that's able to take a look at something and generate alternative text. However, you as the educator need to go in and make sure that, that alternative text makes sense, in the context of what you're teaching. So there are some readers out there that do attempt to sound a little bit more like a person reading. I don't know whether NVDA can change it or not. So the best way that I can explain that is that people that use assistive technology, they're somewhat used to that sound, that kind of robotic sound. And so I'm not sure that making it sound more quote unquote human is really going to change the experience that they have. Meaning if it sounds the way it does, they're still going to be able to learn. So otherwise, making it sound like a human being isn't going to necessarily elevate that ability to learn.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much. I think Marjorie's going to put up the slide, and I know she already put up in the chat room a post-session survey. But I'd like to thank Debbie and thank everyone for attending. And if you have any questions, we can always email. And it looks like, oh, there it is. And just like to say thanks to everyone.
Bye.